Hello everyone, PL Stewart here, and welcome back to my channel, The Drawn Kingdom Saga 7847. And today we have an absolutely marvelous guest, one of mine, and I'm sure many of yours, favorite people in the writing community, beloved booktuber and incredible author, someone who I think handles both of those aspects with such ease and grace, and it doesn't seem like it's she's working hard at it, but I'm sure she is. But yeah, this was really, I was looking forward to this all week, and it's been a tough week. And this is someone who, when you see an old friend and that really, gives you that positive vibe and lifts you up. I was very much looking forward to speaking to Tori. So today we have the wonderful Tori TECKEN. Thank you so much, Tori, for joining me on my channel.
Well, thank you. That was quite an intro. I'll do my best to live up to it. Thank you so much for having me on, PL. I've also been really looking forward to this. I always enjoy whenever we can get on a live stream and chat about books and storytelling. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I think, and I have so many questions for you, many more questions. It's not going to get covered in the time we have. However, I'll do my best to get to most of them, and I want to respect your time as well. But I think where I would love to start is, so you're someone who I look up to in the community as not only a booktuber, but also a writer. And you're also actually, frankly, one of the most experienced writers that I encounter in this space. So you started writing at a very young age and publishing at a very young age. So can you talk a bit about, first of all, what's it like publishing now at the age you are now versus how you started, and maybe talk a little bit about that. And I guess my main question is, when you were doing it when you were younger, was it more just the thrill? Was it, were you really impacted by the business side? Do you feel the same way writing now in your, very successful new burgeoning indie career as sci-fi things that you're doing now versus when you were younger and you were very successful when you were younger? Like, how does it feel now? What's the difference between those two eras of Tori?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think, well, in terms of what's different, everything that I've kind of had to relearn or learn, there's kind of been a new learning curve when it comes to the fact that the internet has become such a huge vehicle for indie authors. And I'm starting at the same place as everybody else when it comes to that. Because there's just so many things that as indie authors, when it comes to selling on the internet, we have to wear all these hats. And when it comes to me as a writer, I think, at that point, I was just a kid who was so full of passion for telling stories, and like I wrote books about horses because I was a horse nut at that point. And it was a little chapter book series about American history told through the eyes of wild horses. And it kind of it was never meant to be as big as it was, to be honest. It was one of those things where my mom was like, this will be a cool homeschool project. We'll print a few copies, sell them to friends and family, and that'll be great. And it just snowballed so quickly. We had no idea what was coming. And I published my first book at 14. And by the end of the year, I was talking to public school classrooms, libraries. I taught a young writers conference the first time when I was 15 years old, taught an adult writers conference by the time I was 16. Between the ages of 14 and 19, I had 9 books out. And it was just an absolute whirlwind. And I think those books were such an incredible foundation for where I'm at now, because I was allowed to kind of have that unfettered playground of writing and just write what made me really passionate. And I learned so much with that. And it was hard because in some ways, because I was very young and I was immediately thrown into a kind of public figure position with my books. So I do have a bit of a tougher skin now that I'm an adult, because I've kind of already been through all of the, like, you're in the public eye and your writing is being criticized by people since I was pretty young. So now it really doesn't bother me anymore. But yeah, this has been kind of a rediscovery of that passion. I think the second chapter as an adult has just been, I'm just leaning into finding my voice as an adult writer and really being intentional with the stories that I want to tell. And it kind of feels like I'm the grown up version of the writer I used to be, which is, pros and cons of both. So yeah, but I'm really just so grateful to be in a position where I can embrace that passion for storytelling again now.
That's incredible. You just have, and I can tell, not just because I know you're a great writer and you're a great person, but I can tell you lean so much on those experiences from the past. I think it seems like they've really helped shape you and in your more mature writing career. And, obviously you have a lot of wisdom that, at a fairly young age that you can rely on about the whole experience, because I think when you have that kind of success very young, that as you transition into a later part of your life, there's so many tools in the toolbox.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That you can use.
I wasn't as, there's less of a hesitance, I think, I feel like I trust my voice a lot already. And even though I've only done 2 fiction books in adulthood, that confidence, I think, was something I really have appreciated, knowing, like, I know I can finish a book. I know that I can go through the publishing process, all of these kinds of things. The mode and the resources I'm using might be different, but that the general process is the same. And yeah, I mean, Bloodstones is kind of my love letter to all of the things that have brought me to this point. So
yes, and we're definitely going to talk about Bloodstones. It is absolutely stupendous book. Can't wait to get eventually, but I'll try and be patient and hold back a bit because I have questions. So quickly, I'll just put up some of the comments. The people that have come by, wonderful friends of the channel. Timothy Wolf, amazing author himself. He says, hello, happy Friday. Hey, Timothy, how's it going? And we have the wonderful Brian Bell from Booktube. Boy, that channel has blown up quite a bit over the last few months.
Amazing.
Yes, he is. Brian doing some great work over there. So check out his channel, not to be missed. And we have another friend of the channel, Shad Zaman, wonderful member of the community, sorry. Hi, Peel and Tori, he says. And another fantastic booktuber, Mr. Luke. Luke's Book Nook. How's it going, Luke? Greetings, my fellow lovely booktubers. Thanks for that, Luke. So, yep, amazing to see everybody here in the chat. So, Tori, when you were writing younger, how did you cope with the success, the pressure, and how are you coping with it now? I'm talking specifically about writing now, not book two, but how did you manage all that? And how are you managing now with this, especially the recent success of Bloodstone, which everybody in the core of the indie community is talking about and giving you lots of praise. How are you handling all that?
When I was younger, I think part of it, it was a little bit of a shell shock at the beginning, because I just none of us were anticipating that it was going to blow up as fast as it did. And I'm typically I'm pretty adaptable. So at the beginning, it was very new and exciting. And it was, there was some definite learning curves, because obviously public speaking is something that a lot of people, including myself, really struggled with at that point. And I had to get over that really quickly, because I was talking to everything from a small classroom of kids to, stages with, hundreds of people watching. And so the reality of it set in pretty fast when it started getting bigger and bigger, and I was asked to do bigger and bigger things. And I met some really phenomenal people who were also authors and people who were running the events, and just, people with such a big passion for storytelling that kind of fed into my joy of doing it. And there were definitely, hard sides to it too. The pressure of being in a spotlight that young and having people, come up to you and say, I want my kid to be just like you someday. Obviously they only see, the public face of that, and don't see all of the other things and the hardships of a teenager desperately trying to find herself behind the scenes. But yeah, it was an incredibly powerful learning experience, the good and the bad bits. And I think now I feel very settled in a lot of ways. The response to Bloodstones has really been humbling, because I had hoped, as we all do, that it would do well and that people would just enjoy the story and fall in love with the characters, and but I've been really really honored by how much of a reception it's received and how positive everyone has been about it. And the launch was so far beyond what I had anticipated, and I was just so grateful for that, because one of the things that I struggled with coming into adult epic fantasy was I was a child author, and there's that tiny imposter syndrome in your brain that says you were a commodity, right? It's not because you were a good writer, it's because you were a commodity. Now you don't have that, and now you're swimming in the ocean with the big fish, you know? Can you handle that? Can you write a book that can, stand up to that kind of heavier level of critique, and show that you've actually learned something over the years? And thus far, I'm very proud of the story that I've put out, and I'm really thankful for the reception it's gotten, and I just can't wait to keep going at this point.
That's great news. We're definitely hoping you keep going, because I want book two selfishly.
Coming.
I want book two now. So, but yeah, and Luke puts up that Tori's book comes on my September TBR. Fantastic news. Cannot wait. Oh, Luke, you're gonna absolutely love it. You're gonna absolutely love it. And I do want to say, and just going back to popular of your books. So the reason I only have Bloodstones here displayed, and not your first book recently, Phased, is that my wife, who is actually traveling right now, she has it with her, so she's reading it. So otherwise, I'd have that to.
I hope she enjoys it.
I'm sure she will. I know I really loved it, and I want to say, Phase was frankly not the type of book I would typically read. Like and that's not to say that it wasn't fantastic. It's just that normally I wouldn't have picked it up. I picked it up because it came highly recommended, and it was someone who I respect and trust as an author. I figured Tori's gonna be a great writer, and sure enough, I was proof right. But it isn't typically the genre.
Right.
However, as you know from me knowing me well in my reading takes, like this is this is right up my alley,
Yep.
right? So, but can you speak a bit about Phased, and also what made you? And I'm always fascinated by people like yourself that are so talented. They can write within the genre, in the larger genre, in subgenres. I can't. I really respect people who can. Like, what made you move from something like Phased to something like this? Like, what?
Well, Bloodstones, I mean, epic fantasy has been my heart genre ever since I started reading it and knew what it was. And even long before I had read my first adult epic fantasy novel, I mean, when I was a kid, when I was 5, 6 years old, 7 years old, I'd go down in my toy room and I'd build these huge cities, and I had these big battles, and it was a big epic scopes. It was always huge, And so, looking back, I kind of smile now, because I'm like, it was still there even at that very young age. I love the scope and the big military stories and the politics and so now, Phased was kind of I went to college and I had started working on an epic fantasy series then, after I'd read some books that really inspired me. And I was in college. I got married during college. I had my first child during college. And then I became a young mom of 3 over the next 5 years. And writing stopped. Because, as anyone with very small children knows, it is very difficult to even find time. And if you do find time, your brain's so gone, you can't string a sentence together. Um, so, Phased was kind of I'm reclaiming my fiction storytelling voice. And I started it in 2019, and I knew that I wasn't ready to step into something like an epic fantasy yet. It was still on the horizon. I knew I wanted to get there. But Phased just started kind of as a passion project, where it kind of started as me wanting to write a YA paranormal story about werewolves that wasn't heavily romance, that wasn't, the typical thing I was seeing on the shelves everywhere. And from that, it turned into an exploration of PTSD and became a very personal project where I was kind of exploring different facets of mental health with the characters. And yeah, I'm very happy that it has found a little bit of a place in the community, because I know that it isn't the typical genre of a lot of the people that I am around on a daily basis. And I'm really grateful that it seems like the people that have picked it up and given it a try have really enjoyed the story, which makes me very happy. It's very near and dear to my heart. But yeah, I always had that my eye on, I knew epic fantasy was where I was going. So
Wow. And I just want to quickly put up a comment from Brian that Phase was a book I loved and never thought I would. Right, I'm in the same boat. And it's not that I expected not to love it. I guess the most honest thing I say, I had high expectations for the writing and you as an author, because just, knowing you the way I do, I knew it would be a good book. I just didn't know it would be my kind of book, and it was, and I loved it. So that in itself was for me just a great thing, and unexpected. And sometimes those surprises are the best ones when it comes to reading, when you just end up loving something that you weren't sure that you would.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a bit, please, about just, give us a bit of an elevator pitch for Phase specifically, and what it's about, before we start wandering away slowly towards Bloodstones and that work.
So
Please?
Phased is technically a young adult paranormal about 2 sisters, Val and Lila Blackwood, who are werewolves. They are true blood werewolves, which means that their bloodline has not been watered down by any kind of human blood. And they are considered incredibly dangerous. And there is a government organization that is trying to rehabilitate them, essentially, and get them to be safe enough to assimilate into human society. And they have lived an incredibly traumatic life up until this point. And basically, they're given the ultimatum that you're given this chance to go to an assimilation school. If you can prove that you can behave, we will take the next steps. If not, you will be living in a cell for the rest of your life. So it is very high stakes. The core of the story is really about Val and Lila's sisterhood bond, and also how 2 people can go through very similar trauma and cope with it in very different ways. Val and Lila are very different personalities, and so they're handling their traumas in very different ways. It is a motley crew, because it wouldn't be a book of mine if it wasn't. And the side characters I loved writing just as much as Val and Lila. For anybody that's read it, Jules, if you know, you know. She's my pocket character. I love her so much. So yeah, that's the general premise of Phased.
And sorry, I just want to put up a comment here from Sarah Beth. Hello, happy Friday to all. Hey, Sarah Beth, thank you so much for coming and joining us. I have to say about Phase that definitely you highlighted the sibling relationship. That for me, it was part of the end that drove the book. And I have to say, like, it was just phenomenal. And I think what I loved about and I'm somewhat of an only child. I've had lots of friends that I look to as brothers and cousins, but and I'm not sure if you have sisters or not, Tori, but one thing I loved was, as you said, there was this sisterly affection between Val and Lila, but it had all the hallmarks of this close but volatile teenage sibling relationship. Competitiveness, stubbornness. There was like the feelings of superiority sometimes, but there was this, and I said this in my review specifically of your book. There's this deep, abiding love and protectiveness, and this profound sense of like actual, like real friendship and respect between the two siblings. And everything took on this added dimension because there were the werewolf blood aspect, right?
Yep.
And I love that element that you added to just ramp up the stakes of their relationship specifically. And then that was one of my favorite parts of the book. But also your secondary characters were wonderful. And there's one character in particular who I won't go into because I don't want to give him too many spoilers. Came off as being like more as deceived and led astray, even brainwashed, but with some potential like nobility behind her actions that maybe kind of wonder like what side is she gonna land on, right? And I truly enjoyed her arc. And what I saw from that character and how you portrayed him is that you are fantastic at writing characters, because that was a character. Whenever there's a character, if an author can write a character in a book that you're guessing about which side of the coin flip that they're on, then you know that author is really adept at writing characters. So definitely have to commend you for that.
Thank you.
But I think the as you noted quickly, so much of I'm a big themes person in my fantasy, and there's tons of themes I could wax political about the themes. There's trust is a big theme. The sisters learning to trust each other and to trust their friends. In terms of they're facing constant this betrayal potentially hanging over them. They feel betrayed. And it's there's a lot about, for me, it's about the underdog, right? And the fact that you chose these essentially in a way social outcasts as a protagonist,
right?
And but they don't stay outcasts throughout the book, and there's times when they go back and forth between being outcasts and popular or unpopular, and that's also feeds into the YA aspect. But I think the biggest thing, and again, sorry, I want to go back to what you touched on as being at heart, was there's some pretty challenging and serious themes. Mental illness, you talked about PTSD, torture, abuse. There's ethics of forced experimentation on sentient beings. Things like corporate greed and courage and the survivor mentality and compassion. There's really amazing themes. But can you speak about, but those are themes that I saw as a reader. Can you speak about the themes that you wanted to specifically inject into Faith as the writer?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely hit quite a few of them right on the head, because they're, like you said, trust, loyalty is a really big theme. That's something that I'm very interested in my stories, is the theme of loyalty. But another big one for me, and it definitely is present for both Phased and Bloodstones, is self-sacrifice, and the idea of doing the right thing even if you don't get thanks for it, and doing the right thing even if it takes something from you. And that was something that, the journey that Lila and Val go on, they don't have a reason to put themselves in the line of fire for these other people. They haven't been given a reason to do that. And it's kind of their journey, not only to trusting the people around them, but trusting themselves and knowing that they have the courage, or there's something good in them that they can bring to the front you know, that kind of loyalty and self-sacrifice theme really comes through as we go further on in the book. Because that's a really big theme and phased for me, and also what friendship should look like. That, you know, that kind of give and take, that it's a two-way street, that you're there for each other. It's not I tried to kind of play with a bit of a smorgasbord of relationships in phase, because the whole main cast has a lot of different dynamic relationships throughout. Um, and yeah, I think there's Val. It depends on the character too, because Val and Lila, I think, represent their own themes also as characters in the story. Val is definitely a character that I poured a lot of my own journey into. Her struggle to control, but also to trust herself, because hidden behind that veneer of, what's the word I'm looking for? She's kind of a loose cannon, so to speak, is in intense amount of fear. And that tough girl attitude that she portrays throughout so much of the book is like, I'm going to hurt you before you can hurt me, because that's protection, right? That's, I've been hurt and now I need to let everyone know I'm scary, I'm tough and scary, you know. And writing her, she's actually probably the most vulnerable character in the book. And she specifically was one that I was able to really explore a lot of deeper themes with, because I was able to pull from a lot of my own experiences at her age, which was very cathartic.
Yeah, I think for me, of all the writers I've read, when I think about some of the best writers in terms of a very adept, sensitive, yet very honest portrayal of things like trauma and mental health issues, like your name stands in that top tier. Anna Smith Spark also comes to mind. She is outstanding at at writing. I mean, dark as hell, but like exceptional. I do, like, you are two authors that definitely stood out for me.
Thank you.
And one theme I also want to touch upon that really struck home for me, and you know that from having reading my work, is that, and I mentioned this in my review, the saddest and scariest, like, really realistic element of Face for me was that the humans in this story have, they've basically they've convinced that the werewolves, it's not enough for the werewolves not to harm humans, like, in order to exist in society, that in essence they have to be devoid of the essence of who they are, to be accepted or tolerated, really, amongst the majority of the human population. And essentially only the eradication of their werewolf traits will suffice. So it's not enough for them to only act human. They have to be human in the mind of the humans, but yet they're willing to subject, but the humanity is absent the humans, and they're willing to subject the werewolves to this horrible physical and emotional pain, even risking their lives to suppress their true nature, right? And there's that theme wrapped up in that about kind of like, does the end justify the means for, and like this position of moral superiority, that entitles to protect the humans from the monsters, right? And you really handled that really well. And can I just ask, is that commentary, I guess that theme, and I assume that was very purposeful, how do you see that reflecting in your experiences or your worldview or what you think about life?
When I write, I typically I discover the story that I'm telling. The characters usually come to life first, and their story builds around them. I don't typically think about themes in the sense that I'm like, okay, here's something I'm seeing in reality, I want to write about that. That's typically, usually it kind of happens the other way, where I will write something And what I hope is that a lot of different people with a lot of different experiences will be able to find something that resonates with them through the story of what the characters are going through. Because one of the things that means a lot to me as a person in the universe is that I always want to find ways that we are the same. I always want to find avenues through which we as humans can empathize with people who are different from us, because I think at the end of the day, that's the power of that has such a power to bring people together, to heal so many rifts, and finding that common ground of two people from two completely different, lifestyles, worldviews, experiences could read Phased and each say, I felt something of myself in this character, whichever one it is, and be able to find a common ground there. And Bloodstones would be the same. Like, I really want the books to be able to resonate with a wide variety of people. And I hope that it achieves that.
I would say definitely achieves that. I know, like again, I said for me, it was one of those books that caught me by surprise. That it was that I liked it so much in terms of the type of book it was, more like the subgenre.
Yep.
And again, it was just exceptionally done, and it definitely resonated with me. And certainly your second book as well really resonated with me. So yeah, once again, congratulations on Phase. It is a
Thank
wonderful
you.
book.
Thank
And
you.
And you should be definitely proud of it. Now, I want to quickly take a quick detour before we come back to Bloodstones. Okay, if that's okay. So,
absolutely.
So you are, and I also want to mention quickly that I'm not surprised. Like, Tori, you're someone in the community who's so positive and you are so compassionate, and you're always looking out for the best in us. And I think you're one of the people who you bring out the best in us. You've done so many things that are so altruistic and just for the love of others. And I think that's how you live your life. And it very much comes out in everything you do in this space. So besides being a phenomenal author, you're also, an exceptional booktuber and very beloved. And you have a great channel. It's highly regarded. You have more than 4,000 followers, like subscribers. Now, Booktube and what you do in this space, obviously it's linked to your writing, but as we talked about the challenges of writing, Booktube can be pretty tough too. As much as it's rewarding and wonderful, it can be tough. So, yeah. What do you find the challenges? Like, there's so many positives to Booktube, clearly.
Oh, absolutely.
And obviously, you and I are the kind of people. I think we focus on the positives, more than anything else. But what are some of the challenges, and also which do you find more challenging in terms of your time and what you're doing, like balancing writing, booktubing, your blogging as well, your Before I Go blog member? Like, what is the side that kind of challenges you more? Are they equally challenging for different reasons? Like, you have your writing and you have booktube and blogging. Like, which one is the more one?
Honestly, probably writing, because I have a hard time convincing myself to sit down and take time for me. As a mom, and especially as I'm getting to a point where my wonderful, incredible children are starting to gain a lot more independence, and they are kind of branching out and trying things, and they can entertain themselves for a couple hours at a time and not need me, which has been, a normal transition of motherhood, but it's also giving me more time now to sit down on work on projects like Bloodstones. But if it's just me, I'm a serial extrovert. And so if I'm doing something that involves somebody else, I will prioritize that. So for example, making new content for the channel to, try to keep a consistent schedule for my audience, and doing the blog so that I don't feel like I'm just freeloading in the group chat, writing reviews. And then it's there's that guilt. I do feel a lot of guilt when I sit down and I'm like, I'm so passionate about these stories and I really want to write them. But every time I sit down, I'm like, well, I should be doing all these other things. So I'm in a part of life right now where I'm learning how to recenter and to give myself permission to say, your stories matter. Take the time, be present in the story, let everything else go to the sides for a little bit. That's okay. The house isn't going to burn down. um, so, yeah, I would say, honestly, my time management with writing is the most challenging part. Because I can always talk myself into, well, I have all these other things to do.
No, I hear you. And that balance, I mean, I'm not nearly the booktuber that you are, but I found that as I'm starting, my booktube channel is slowly, climbing, growing. That balancing that with my writing has been tough, but I find the booktube part far easier
Oh, yeah.
to manage than the writing. But I just want to quickly put up this comment from Luke's Book Nuke. He's giving you big kudos there. He says, I just want to highlight Tori and Kay's. I presume that's Kay from Kay Hidden Shelf, another wonderful Booktuber discussion on mental health and fantasy. I have to catch that. I saw it briefly. Actually, it was just before this. I noted. I didn't know what was out there, and I saw. I was like, oh, I got to watch that. It was a discussion that had a profound effect on me as I live with depression and anxiety. That chat was incredible. Oh, wonderful.
Thank you, Luke.
Awesome, Luke. And thanks for sharing that, Luke. Your courage in sharing, what challenges you're facing. So, and I'm just happy to hear that, and those are two very compassionate people, Tori and Kay, and Luke as well. Obviously, was he in the? Was it the three of you, Tori, on that, or was it?
It was Kay and I on the screen, and I feel horrible because we always schedule these things at a time where my wonderful friends who are across the pond have a hard time joining in. But they've been really wonderful in watching the replay, and yeah. But it was a very calm, relaxed conversation, which was mostly Kay. Like she's so calm. It's lovely to talk to her.
Yeah, Kay is amazing. She is incredible. So, but yeah, and I have to say on that vein, Tori, there's so many. You've had so many accomplishments as a booktuber and a writer. But specifically as a booktuber, I always go back to you got a bunch of people in the community together, or for some videos. So let me not talk about this because this is something that I just find it was so incredible that you did this. So can you talk about what you did with those videos and what they were about?
Yeah, so I've done 2 of them so far. I do hope to do another one in the future, but that was probably a year and a half ago now, maybe a year and a half ago, where I reached out to a lot of different authors in the community, traditional published, indie published, first novel, have published multiple novels, just a huge variety of authors. Um, and asked them all to submit a brief video clip of them giving some encouragement to other authors, especially if they might be having kind of a down day or doubting themselves. And I was so amazed at the outpouring of response to that, in terms of how gracious all of the authors were sharing their time. And I can't remember how many authors were on it, but it was at least 40 or 50. And they were all so eloquent and shared some amazing wisdom with everybody that was watching and each other. And I think I really just wanted to highlight the power that this community has and how, writing can be a very isolating craft. And to some degree, it has to be, because at the end of the day, it's us alone with a blank page, and we have to be the one to put the story on it. And that can be really hard. It takes so much energy, mentally, emotionally, to write those stories. And sometimes we need a little bit of a pick-me-up from the people around us who get it. And the second video that we did for that series was readers. I asked the same of readers to share an encouragement for their just kind of generically a favorite author, so that if writers were having a bad day, they could jump on the video and watch, a whole bunch of readers encouraging them and telling them why they love reading so much. So that I was really blessed with the responses to those projects, because they're still some of my favorite videos I've made on the channel.
Yeah, and again, Tori, thank you for doing that.
Thank you for being a part of it.
Oh, I was honored. It just speaks to the kind of person you are, and why you're so beloved in the community, and the fact you would do that for others. Like, that's just absolutely incredible. So if you haven't watched that video, folks, those videos, please go and check out Tori's channel. And if you're feeling down and you're feeling, Tori talked about imposter syndrome for the writers out there. It's a real pick me up, right? And you realize as well, I think, one of the most marvelous aspects that Tori did, that she did accomplish in doing that, is that you definitely understand you're not alone, right? That you're, as Tori said, the writing itself, there's a certain aspect of his isolation, but truly, I don't know, Tori preaches this mantra: it truly takes a village to, do what we do in the space as creatives, whether
Absolutely.
it's blogging or writing, and it just emphasizes that, brings it home when you watch that video, and it highlights how many other amazing people, supportive people there are in our community, right? And there's a lot of spaces in social media, including Booktuber, that maybe sometimes people consider not as positive. But yep. I can tell you that overall, when you see such things that Tori did, and you see all the people that come together to promote something that's totally positive, it just reminds us how lucky we are to be part of this space. So
absolutely.
So I want to quickly put up someone who do another Booktuber. Shout out to someone who do another member of the community. I was there, and as someone who suffers from chronic psychic pain, as I like to call it, I appreciated Tori and Kay's talk. So excellent.
Thanks for watching it, Britton.
Yeah, great to hear. Great to hear. So I think there's some other questions I have about Booktube that I really would like to ask you. So you've been on it for a while now. As I said, 4K subscribers. You're definitely gaining popularity as the months go on. What are for you some of the most memorable, some of the highlights of you talked about, obviously, the videos you put together. What are some of the highlights, some of the conversations that really resonate with you? You see some people in the chat talking about your mental health discussion, like Luke with Britain. Like, what are some of the convos? I know there's so many, right? It's hard to remember, but what's some of the ones that really stick out in your mind that you've been a part of, or things that you've done on Booktube?
Well, we've mentioned the Dear Writer series already. That definitely was a big one. I really have loved, I love chatting like we are right now. I love having those conversations with other people in the community and learning from each other. And my Motley Crew Chats is a series that I do on my channel, where I reach out to other authors, mostly other booktubers at this point, but I have had other authors on Motley Crew before, and we just have a super casual chat about books and the community and whatever else we decide to chat about. I've also done a lot of author interviews, and what's so cool about those that sticks out to me is the range of people that I've been able to meet. I have been someone's first ever appearance on social media as an interview. It was their debut novel. They'd never shown their face on social media before, and he very graciously agreed to do an interview with me. And then all the way up to talking to just titans of the genre like Steven Erikson and Janny Wirtz and Fonda Lee. I've had the opportunity to talk to her. Juliette Marillier, I recently talked to. She's just a delight of a person to talk to. And so just having this incredible range of knowledge and experience from everyone, from someone who's putting out their very first novel and they're right in the thick of it, and they have all these, fresh experiences of what they're doing with their first ever book launch, to authors who've been writing in the genre for decades. And I've learned so much from all of them. And yeah, the talking to other people on my channel is easily the best part of what I do.
Yeah, and I can say from being a fan of your channel, you've done some phenomenal interviews, especially with
Thank you.
all kinds of people, and I love watching your content. And I think one of the things I love watching about your content, there's three things that I really especially love with your content is when you do your book hauls, because you don't just okay, well these are the books that I hauled and blah blah. There's always a time to why you chose the book, what you're expecting to get from the book. You know, what even sometimes you may have some trepidations about, oh, I'm not sure this is gonna be for me, but I'm gonna try it.
Yeah.
And you know, and then you always tend to follow up with at least some part kind of a review
Yep.
mixed in. You may not be a dedicated review, but you'll mix it in. I absolutely love your the pieces you do, your conversations with, especially like we talked about the one with Kay, ones that you've done with Joanna. A lot of your and the Motley Crue stuff is really, really you know, really, it's really good. And you're also very candid about when you talk about things like PTSD and mental health, and you always tie in, like you're always willing to say, especially when it comes to reviews, that if something's not for you, you're fantastic about saying, "Hey, this is perhaps a personal thing. It's
Yep.
not because it wasn't a great book.
Yeah.
It's because of this." And I really respect that about you, the way
Thank you.
you reviews that way.
Thank
So
you.
that's phenomenal. Sorry, Luke mentioned. I want to put this up. As readers made friends and interacting with authors like you guys help my put pen to paper and start to put down a story that has been in my head for 10 years. The best community.
Love
Yes,
that.
thank you. That's love that. Luke, and congratulations, Luke. He's working on a book, so we're excited to see when that comes out. Can't wait to read it. So fantastic that you know. Hopefully, all his friends and supporters here have helped will continue to help him as he becomes a published author as well as a fabulous blogger and book tutor. So
That's why I always tell people when they say, I'm not a writer, I have no aspirations to write. I've heard several of my reader friends say that, and I always say, yet.
yet, yet, and I'm sure it's in there. And then Britton says, I wrote a fantasy novel. Fantastic.
Nice
Congratulations,
work.
Britton. Working on a Western, but I'm taking a break right now. I'm hoping to get back to it soon. Another, yeah, fantastic. Can't wait to see it when it comes out. Congratulations on that. And, you know, there is an immeasurable amount of space for new books especially in the indie sphere. That's one of the wonderful things about being an indie author and part of this community, that you know every day it seems like this amazing book coming out right
Right?
from some new corner, and some author is like whoa, and then you find out it's fabulous, you hear it's well reviewed, and it's like, where did this come from?
Yep.
Right. And that's I love that aspect about our study community. And I think one of the things that tying into that is that many of those great new discoveries happen because of booktubers.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, you know, it's essentially us that
Yep.
are, you know, pick up a book and talking about how great it is, and then next thing you know, and it's a really fabulous feeling
Yes.
when someone says, "Oh, well, based on your rec, I tried this book and I loved it too." That you just feel so good, and
Yep.
because we're both authors, we both also understand that the corollary there with you know that
Yeah.
effect as well, right? So it's awesome. So what are some of the, if you can if you're able to kind of put it in perspective, Tori, what are some of the new finds that you've gotten recently that have, I know it's probably a really long list because we all have,
Really
but
long
what,
list.
yeah, but what are some of the new finds you've gotten to
Yeah.
recently? Maybe some that perhaps, you know, okay, you maybe got a rec, you know, on Booktube, or something that you just saw, oh, that caught my eye, and it turned out to be a gem that maybe people aren't really talking about as much as you feel they should.
Well, other than the ones that I talk about ad nauseum on my own channel, let's see. Well, the one I'm reading right now actually is a great example of that. So I am currently reading Nomads of the Sea by Kobe Zucker. And this book has 19 ratings on Goodreads, and that is criminal, you guys. This is one of those books where you pick something up because one of your friends, Kay's Hidden Shelf, has been trying to get me to read this for a year and a half. This is an absolute like mind-blowing debut novel. It really is. It's martial, like it's a military fantasy, but it's set at sea in an archipelago. And I heard Alan say it that way the other night. It's archipelago. Now I can't get it out of my head. Archipelago. And the character work, the pacing, I mean, this is like one of those books. I can't wait to gush about it in a review because I'm almost done with it. And I'm like, how are we not talking about this book? How is this not in everybody's hands? Because it is so polished and so well written for a debut. I'm just mind blown by it. So everyone who's here, please put it on your TBR because it's very, very good.
See, I've seen it around, like I'm not familiar with it. I don't know what it's about.
Yep.
Thanks for that.
I think you'd really like it, PL.
Yeah, and nautical stuff, like it sounds right in my alley. So yeah, I'm definitely gonna check that one out. And isn't it funny how, again, you've read this book, it's incredible. You said it's so polished for a debut novel. You're now on it, and hopefully that will help bring some interest because again, you're very popular. But isn't it funny how those under the radar books, they have their niche audience, and but sometimes all it takes is a booktuber to go, hey, this is great, and sometimes it catches fire.
Yes,
and we've seen that phenomenon happen before. And have you been part of that, either yourself or a connection of booktubers, like kind of you felt like helped propel a certain book up to where now a lot of people are on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the ones that I remember being on the very early kind of cusp of their career for Yellow Sky Revolt by Baptiste Pinson-Wu, and he's working on his Three Kingdoms Chronicles. Alan and I, and read by Kyle, did a discussion on that book when it first came out. I was one of the first people who read it and reviewed it. And it's been so cool to see his, continued success. And he's written a whole bunch more books since then. And another one that I can think of is, well, she was honestly launched of her own incredible talent too. And that's one thing I want to mention with both of these authors is that we can only boost what they've already written. Like they've put in the hard work. And Booktubers, as an author, I know how incredibly helpful Booktube is in launching those books to success, but you have to have a book that's worthy of that success to get it. You know what I mean? Jacqueline Hagan's Riverfall Chronicles, Wickwire Watch, she was in Spiffbo and was a finalist, which was incredible for, again, a debut novel and well-deserved. That's now one of my top indie fantasy series, and myself and Kay's Hidden Shelf, and I think Alan got a hold of that one and really loved it. So yeah, I mean, it's really fun to love a book and then start seeing other people getting a hold of it, and it starts to kind of creep out, and that's one thing that I think is really cool about the indie community specifically is when you're in the first 5 reviews or 10 reviews of a book, there's something really special about that because you know that you're watching the birth of something that's just going to keep growing and expanding. And it's very cool to be at the very beginning of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Extremely, extremely rewarding. And to feel like you're part of helping people discover something that they're going to love and helping that author, that's a really special feeling. And Britton puts up, I know it is, I'm always telling people to go ahead and read Black Liberty Red Wolf. That's on my TBR. It sounds like very psychedelic type. Some of my friends have read it and they said I think Jimmy Nuts did a great review of that book. He says it's really weird but amazing. So, and Britton also mentions Perdido Street Station because I barely see one time. That's on your TBR. I'm gonna have to add that one too. Thanks for the rec, Britton. I'm gonna have to definitely add that as well. And speak of the wonderful Kay's Hidden Shelf. She says she's stopping by to say hi. How's it going, Kay? And says she'll be back for the replay, so she'll catch this chat with Tori later on. And have to give a huge shout out to our incredible fearless leader at Before We Go blog and wonderful leader at Grimdark Magazine. They're incredible Beth Tabler. She is just phenomenal. We all owe so much to Beth, and we're honored to be part of Before We Go blog. can't say enough great things about Beth. She's just amazing, and always a pleasure, Beth, to see you in the chat. Thanks for stopping by. And Luke notes, DB Booktube, sorry, me again. DB Booktube, and especially with the smaller channels, is that we discover an amazing array of SFF books. More importantly, self-pub indie books. Yeah, definitely the indie scene is just, it is amazing and getting bigger and more exciting all the time. So Sarah Beth notes, I love that our corner of Booktube is so welcoming to indie authors. I've read so many, including before I discovered Booktube, and I love it. And Wickwire was amazing. Okay, fantastic. So happy that you loved Wickwire. Again, SPFP was flawless. I had the honor of, with Taylor from ABC Pages on Page Tuning, interviewing the last SPFPO finalists from 9. And of course, we're now into Spiff Box 10. I think, Tori, I think, did you put a video up on some of the Spiff Box ones you're reading, or were you playing? Did you have some on your TBR recently?
I have to catch up and do that at some point. I did one for Spiffbo 9 last year where I talked about the ones I wanted to read. And I will probably do another one of those for Spiffbo 10. I am one of the judges for Before We Go blog. So I'm not sure like how much content I'll put out at this point, but I'll probably drop some stuff later on.
Well, can't wait to see. I hope you find some favorites in that treasure trove. And Shad notes, yeah, I love finding those really under the radar indie authors. And yeah, definitely. And Luke notes 100%. Sarah, and then Britton comes back with, he says, I think you would like The Scar in the same world as Perdido Street Station. It's nautical fantasy. So awesome. So as well, Tori, when it comes to Booktube, so I know for me, one of the absolutely insane things I've gotten to on Booktube is you got to talk to all these wonderful authors, and it's amazing with the indie authors. I mean, as you know, we tend to be pretty accessible, right? And you know, kind of like, hey, you know, I think some Booktubers can be surprised, like, hey, I message them. Typically, there is not an agent. You have to go through a publicist. You message, hey, you know, Tori, would you like to come on my show? You're like, yeah, sure, why not? And then you come on, but sometimes, and obviously, a lot of our traditional published friends who are authors are also extremely accessible, but sometimes not for various reasons. But in any case, I think one of the things that's really been the highlight of my very short Booktube career is that I've gone to interview authors that I've read their works. I've read the works for so long, and I look up to them as authors, and it's like you kind of meet some of your heroes, and that's really like that's really it's a surreal feeling, but it's just such an incredible one. So and I can guess one for sure with you, but I'll let you divulge that. So who are some of the authors you read their works long, you know, either near the beginning stage of your Booktube career or maybe even prior, and now you've gotten to, you know, speak to them live? Like, who are some of it, and it just like, how was that experience, and who are some of those authors? Because I think that's a real treat for us.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first, when I reached out to Steven Erikson, who hands down has been the most influential author on me as an epic fantasy writer, I never expected to get a response because I didn't know. I thought, you know, Steven Erikson, you know, and he was lovely. He responded, and we had a lovely chat over email, and we ended up having a discussion on my channel. And he came back for one of my imposter syndrome episodes where we talked about he and I and Andrew D. Meredith talked about world building, and just that was so mind-blowing because I remember 11 years ago telling my husband, someday I want to go to a con and get to say hi to Steven Erikson from like the crowd. You know, like the idea that I'd have a one-on-one conversation with him was just so far outside what I imagined. And so that one was a big one. Another one that's on my radar that I kind of have bucket listed is I am determined to get Pierce Brown on my channel, because he's the other one that has been just, I love the Red Rising series so incredibly much. And I think having been to a Q&A at a book signing that he did and just hearing him in interviews and stuff, I think he and I have a very similar philosophy on character writing, which would be really fun to dig into. And I feel like I'm very late to a lot of the epic fantasy gems. So a lot of the newer influences that I've been able to talk to, like I mentioned before, Janny, Fonda Lee. I love Fonda Lee's character writing so much. And she was delightful to talk to. She was a really fun conversation. And just, I'm so grateful that these authors are willing to take time out of their day to talk to me. You know, like that's such a privilege, no matter how many books they've written, if it's their first book or their 50th, like the fact that they're setting aside time to come and talk to me about their writing is just really, really cool. So
It's such an amazing feeling, and yeah, you've had some phenomenal guests of whether it be indie or traditionally published authors that have big followings and big backlists and high degree of popularity. And yeah, but it is a really special feeling when it's someone, especially an author like Stephen Erickson, or Jenny Wirtz, that iconic, considered iconic.
Yeah.
In the genre, it's just as special as finding an indie author who isn't perhaps as well known, but you can just see the talent and the stardom ready to burst out, and they're both really just really special, and everything in between. Really all special experiences. So I just want to put up quickly a few comments, and Britton says, "Yep, so many books, so little time." Amen to that. Our TBRs. Ashad said, talking about Beth Tabler, you grace us because you love Paternus. It's an awesome series.
I'm excited to read that one too.
Yeah, me too. Beth notes she runs a Paternus fan club. And yeah, Dirk Ashton, another pillar of the community. I have to get those books. It's a travesty I haven't to yet.
He's a great guy.
Definitely when I read it, hope to chat to him as well. Ben says he was noting on the Erickson love skimming through Gardens of the Moon, the bookstore. Listen, Erickson's Malazan it's an experience. I'm only 4 books in, but wow, it is. Yep. I mean, I know it's going to, and I know it's a personal favorite of yours, Tori. I know it's going to figure in my top 10 series of all time at some point when I finish it. I don't know where though, because I still kind of don't know where it's going, to be honest with you.
Oh yeah.
So it's just so massive and so sprawling, and it's just. But I am loving the journey, and I won't say there are times I'm not lost. But then,
for sure, so am I.
Despite that, you cannot ignore the brilliance, the absolute brilliance of the writing, and the world is just it is absolutely incredible. So but and then Luke knows need to read Paternus series, and Beth says, Tori, we can chase that down for Bob. Hey, there you go. So that's awesome. Now, I do want to definitely get into speaking specifically about the Bloodstones. Now, you're going to have to forgive me. We're going to be, when we're taking some breaks, I will be just dropping a few lines because, Tori, I'm telling you, I absolutely love this book. This book is incredible. I tell everyone that that's willing to listen about how good it is. I think you've received a lot of praise for this book, and I think Grimdark Magazine gave you a big shout out as being up and coming star on the fantasy scene because of this book. So again, kudos, all the praise is well deserved. Can you tell us a bit about what's the inspiration behind this book, why you wrote it, and give us a bit more detail about this awesome book, please?
Sure. So The Bloodstones is actually the prequel trilogy to a series I started in college over 10 years ago. And I was doing when I decided I was going to get back into epic fantasy, I started doing some backstory for that secondary series and realized that I, as many of us do in fantasy, had a prequel series on my hands. And what this book is I have always been intrigued and fascinated by the larger than life legends of history, people that whose name like everyone just knows, right? Especially for those of us that are history nerds, you know, Achilles is a really easy one. And like for me, I was really big into Egyptian history. So like Thutmose the First, Hatshepsut, like a lot of these huge names in history, Alexander the Great. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And this book is basically, my question was, the legends are so far beyond human by the time they reach us in history. Who were they at the beginning? What started the legend? And in my world, the Bloodstones is the beginning of that story. It is the beginning of the characters who will become the legends of their world. And of course, it centers around a lot of familiar things like a succession war. We have, you know, conflict between multiple countries. It is largely Eastern inspired. And it's a coming of age novel in some ways, and in other ways it is a very well established, like there's 4 POVs, so you're getting a little bit of everything. But it's the beginning is 3 brothers witness an execution that they were never meant to see, and it changes the course of their life forever. And that's the literal like first chapter of the book, and off and away.
Yeah, it is just, and again, you're gonna have to forgive me. I'm going to. I have a couple of
Please.
lines here that I'm good. So, I know I'd be reading the whole book if I the lines, but the king is the beating heart of his nation. The betrayal of one of his old sworn warriors is a knife in that beating heart. Just one of those lines that, you know, so many poignant lines that stuck out to me in this book. And quickly, I just want to put up here that Bryn says he's home to read Phase in October.
Awesome.
And Luke just quickly mentioned that he's going to dedicate a year to Malazan. And Brenton had said earlier that he might save Malazan for next year, reading his erased. Yeah, I hear you. So back to this book. So, wow. So this book, I think the one thing that I talked about Phase, and I talked how Phase was an unexpected, pleasant surprise for me in terms of the subgenre, and the writing was great, but it was a book that I didn't necessarily expect to like as much as I did. This was a book based on the blurb and what I heard about that I expected like, and boy did it blow my expectations out of the water. Now, you talked about epic fantasy kind of being in your DNA. Tori, and something that you aspired to. You're part of that milieu, and you aspired to write. So, were there challenges in the scope? I mean, this is definitely epic in scope. Were there challenges making it epic, but yet it had a very intimate feel still with your characters? Even though there's 4 POVs, it definitely has a very intimate feel. Was that something as well that was purposeful in terms of when you wrote the book?
Very much so. And I think in some ways there's kind of two. First of all, I am a character-driven reader and writer. The characters are usually the first glimmer in that big black open space that we find ourselves in the brainchild phase of a new idea is a character. There's always a character there, and I walk up to them, who are you? And as I get to know them, the world starts to take on shape and color, and I start putting pieces around them, and it starts getting bigger, and they have a family, and how does the family fit, you know, and it just expands and expands from there. And the story builds from those characters. And I think that's part of why that feels so intimate, because the characters are, like you read in the quote, they are the beating heart of the story. The plot is there, and it's intentional, and there are beats that I know I want to hit, but the characters are really the heart and soul of why I do what I do. And I can also, you couldn't have given me a better compliment, because that's exactly what I hope people feel in the story. And that's something that I have to credit Steven Erikson for really opening my mind to how you could marry those two things, because I feel like for the scope and vastness of Malazan, he does the same thing, where those characters are, it's such an intimate perspective, and you're right next to them in the dust, and the whole time you're just mind blown about how big this world is, but these characters are so intimate. And that's something that I've always kind of held as part of my voice, and reading Steven Erikson kind of set it free, I think.
Wow. Well, I mean, you couldn't have. Right. That's a pretty good inspiration to pick. Steven Erikson.
He blew my mind. Like, there were so many things he taught me just from me reading, not even the entire series of Malazan. So,
well, it looks like you're on your way to very much, the success, that kind of success, I think. I'm going to read quickly another quote from the book that I absolutely loved. And forgive my pronunciation of the characters' names.
Okay.
But Ixario was fierce, hot fire, barely contained, the flames dancing dangerously close to the edge of a blacksmith's forge. Itaki Ujo was cold, dark ice at the edges of the ocean, the promise of winter's deadly bite. Like, I mean, for people like you who know me well, and my friends and people who follow my show, they know if it's a pejorative, I'm somewhat of a prose snob. I love me some great prose. You know that, the Jenny Words, the Guy Cabro Kids, etc. Tori, you're no slouch in the prose department. It certainly came out in this book.
Thank you.
Now, and of course, likely because of the difference in subgenres, but certainly while the prose was good in phase, I certainly saw an elevation to very much match the epic scope. Like, for me, prose is that necessary vehicle for secondary worlds that I need to take me there, and you definitely hit the mark. So again, was that purposeful? Because we do see epic fantasies that have more modern type prose, and not that your prose was accessible. It's just that it was. I love the poetic aspect, and I love that that more elevated prose that you definitely you dialed that up in this book. Was that a purposeful thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved. So before I actually started writing stories, I started with poetry. When I was very young, I think I was about 7 or 8 when I started with poetry, and I still write a lot of poetry as a way to express emotion and all of that. And I've always been fascinated by the images that you can conjure with poetry, and especially, I think, you'll see a lot of those kinds of lines specifically in character description with me, because the characters, like I said before, are such a focal point that I really like giving them those moments of impact in the prose, because I am not somebody who is talented enough to sustain prose to the level of something like Janny Wirtz. Like, every sentence is that same level when you're reading a Janny Wirtz book, right? And I like the way that I approach it is more, I like having those moments that kind of stand away from the rest of the prose, that they kind of suck you in a little bit and make you go, oh, wait a second, and go back. And that's what I tried really hard to do with the prose of this, because prose I would not consider my strong suit. I feel like the characters are definitely my strong suit, and then the prose is something that, or the way I could say that is it's a more natural, organic thing for me. It just kind of spills out, whereas the prose is something I definitely try to be more intentional about and think through, okay, how do I want to invoke the vision of what's going on here? What words? Try something a little bit different, and I do play around with descriptions a lot. So yeah, thank you so much I love that scene that you just read that quote from was one of my favorites to write in the book. I love those two together so much. So
yeah, and it was incredible. And I have to say again, for your no slouch in the prose department, you're proving that with this book. And of course, you mentioned Janny Wirtz. I mean, no one writes like Janny.
Of her own.
Yeah, exactly. As you know, she's my favorite author. I mean, she's but again, it was fantastic. What you did with that. Brendan says, getting an airtip bird on there maybe someday. You never know.
Never know.
You never know.
He
And
was gracious enough to let me send him a copy of my book, so he does have it.
oh wow, that's amazing. Oh wow,
Yeah,
that's
that was very,
incredible.
very kind of him.
Well, I'm sure he's going to love it. And Luke says, "Whoa, Tori, you've cemented my decision to start Malazan January 2025. Is this your fault now? Luke is blaming you. So, Luke, I'm telling you, you're in for a ride. It is a ride. So, I'm going to read just 2 more quotes from the book, and that's going to lead into some questions as well. So, this one. Sometimes it was easier to let your mind go quiet, to let the sound of the voices, the cold air, the ache of the bruises overpower the feelings within. To eat a bowl of rice and leave the bodies of the dead where they lay. If there was a way to forget them completely, Garen had not found it. There was a small room in his mind, shut tightly behind a panel door, where his mother and the aqua on the bloodstones haunted the walls. Sometimes the door would slide open of its own accord, but he could always close it up again. Once he hadn't known how, but he was learning. Nin would learn how to close the doors someday too. So just an absolutely wonderful passage. Speaking to a trial that one of the characters going through and some trauma. So again, leaning into your very adroit ability to convey mental health, and when people are in a certain frame of mind and struggling with their mental health, and it's just a beautiful passage. Can you talk a bit about, and there's a lot more in the book, but can you talk a bit about, without spoilers, about that passage and where that came from?
Yeah. So Garen is kind of the backbone POV of the Bloodstones. He's the first character that you meet in the story. And he goes through, I mean, all of the characters do, but Garen especially goes through a lot of really, really hard trauma at a very young age. And in my own work through therapy and learning about trauma, there's a dissociation that has to happen in any kind of trauma when you are in a scenario that's highly traumatic and your brain cannot process it. There's something that has to change inside. You have to somehow either reconcile it or put it away or deny that it happened, or there's a lot of different ways that people can react to it. And Garen is his journey in this first book is learning how to essentially shut away his self in order to cope with the things that he otherwise would not be able to. And that's a huge theme of this first book, and the theme of self and identity, and how much can you shut that part of yourself away before it starts pressing at the seams, is a huge theme of the trilogy as a whole. So I'm trying really hard to lean into an exploration of that kind of response to trauma with Garen specifically.
It was so well done, and that quote really, I think I reread that quote several times. It really stuck with me, and again, just an example of how well you convey trauma and characters dealing with that, and really leaning into your experiences and your expertise in that realm. So just really well done. So I have one more, and this is dialing into the fact that I think one thing in the last part of the conversation, we talked about strength, and you were talking about prose, and I know sometimes as writers, we're not as good as realizing our strengths as we are identifying our weaknesses, right? and sometimes we don't realize, like, for example, your prose was excellent book, and maybe it's something you would have thought you never would have got complimented on as much. However, and sometimes it's the readers that bring that out and go, when you see a review, it's like, oh, I didn't know I did that.
Yeah.
And of course it's subjective, but do you know what I mean? It's just one of those nice aspects that, okay, now you can kind of lean into that a bit more and work on that if it's a strength, to just overall hone your work and make it better. So now when I say this, I preface it by saying I love the action sequences in Phased. So not that it surprised me, but I absolutely love the action sequences in the Bloodstones, and I'm going to read this quick quote from the latter part of the book. One of my favorite characters, and I know, and I want you to speak about this character because I know reading the reviews, some people like loved her, some people had issues with her, but anyways, I'm going to read this quote, and again, forgive the pronunciations of the characters, names, etc. So Sindri knew the blades were sharp, and the need for vengeance would be running hot in the blood of every warrior. Her own hands itched with the need to spill blood. She would not rest until the Tudlar and the Uratar were destroyed. So one thing, like when you introduced, the tribal peoples, and I was like, the book was already awesome, but you totally, I'm absolutely hooked now, right? I'm absolutely hooked. So, can you speak a bit about that character, her journey, and about the phenomenal action scenes that most of the really great action scenes come involving, this character in her world. So, can you talk a bit about that, please?
Yeah. So Sindri is introduced a little bit later on from the other three POVs, and that was a timeline choice, which, if you lay the timeline out, you can see why. Otherwise, she'd have been way too old by the end of the book. But Sindri, I knew I had gotten through, a little bit of the first chunk of the book, and I could tell that I was missing something that I wanted to include. And I kind of sat down, I was like, okay, what am I missing? And I kind of look at it as, here's the perspectives I have. How can I do an opposite to that? And one of the things I've always been very fascinated by is how our single decisions, or the decisions of one country, say in the world, ripple outwards so quickly to other people, other countries. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, let's go to a different country on this continent. And how is what's going on at the heart of the story rippling outwards? What does that look like? What are the wider implications of what's going on in Katesh and where Garen and the other characters are? And Sindri just launched herself into my brain, which was very much as her character would. And suddenly she was just kind of there, and she was like, I'm your POV. And I was like, all right, cool. Nice to meet you. She was such a joy to write because the other characters, there's, like you read with that bit with Garen, there's so much intentionality that goes into everything he thinks, every movement he makes, and the decisions. And Sindri was the opposite of that. Sindri is pure unbridled instinct, and it was so much fun to write her that way. And because she can give us, the journey that Garen is on and the journey that Sindri is on, there are a lot of similarities between the two of them, and yet they are so incredibly different. Sindri is also my exploration of a topic that comes up a lot in epic fantasy right now, or not just epic fantasy, but writing in general, which is the strong female character. And what I found is, as somebody who really enjoys reading strong female characters when they're well written, is that oftentimes they tended to feel like they were very one note, they were very kind of cardboard cutout, or they're just a big brat with a sword, And so Sindri, I wanted to subvert that character trope by making her very strong physically. She's a warrior. She is fearless. She will jump into a fight without thinking twice. And yet she's incredibly weak in a lot of other areas in her life. And she leans very heavily on the people around her and struggles with the idea that I think this is the only thing I can do. I think that these swords are my entire identity. And so she became a very interesting. So I love that the very polarized opinions that people have of Sindri are exactly what I kind of hoped would happen, because I think she's doing exactly what I intended her to. I say intended like I have any control over her, but like I loved exploring that trope in a very intimate way, and okay, how do we break that strong female character trope and make it something really nuanced, and show some what is the weak side of a strong female character?
No, and that was fascinating. I absolutely love the character, and I did love that aspect as well, where her sister, while just as fierce and just as competent, rounds her out, and she does lean on her sister for more of the political savvy and the intellectual side, and I love that. She was just a wonderful character. As soon as she showed up, and of course, and this is where I talk about comparators, like that aspect of kind of like the more rudimentary tribes in terms of technology, encountering the more sophisticated technological aspects of the world, like has seen it. Yvonne Roycroft's Sundered Nation, excellent in that, with kind of like essentially inspired by like the Goths and the Vandals versus the Romans. Steven Erikson, of course, so many and he has so many races and cultures and tribes.
Oh, yeah.
I was really brought back to Karsa Orlong, one of my favorite characters. So I love that aspect of your class of culture. Well, without giving away too much, class of cultures and the so-called barbarians, coming out of their more insular habitations to meet with the so-called sophisticated. So I absolutely love it. So many things about this book.
What's fun as an author, and I think why Sindri was such a necessary addition to the POVs for me as a writer, was I enjoy like reminding my reader that they're listening to unreliable narrators every once in a while. So I like the idea that, you're over in Katesh and you'll hear one of the characters talking about the barbarians down south, and then you go down south and you talk to Sindri and she goes, oh, those, pompous northerners up north. And like, they have these very like kind of morally superior visions of each other because they have no idea what the lifestyle of these people way over here is like. And so it's fun to play with that on both sides of the fence. So Sindri definitely opened a lot of doors for some interesting perspective play in the book.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see where you take these individual plot arcs. I know it's gonna be amazing. Can't wait for book 2. I know we're winding down because I want to respect your time. We're getting close to that. But can you quickly tell us? Any news you can perhaps give us about when the sequel might be anticipated, or other projects that you might be working on that you can discuss that are not top secret, because we know obviously writers we tend to be indies. We tend to work on these top secret things that we can't talk about until later. So
so the Queen's Wolf is book 2, and that you're gonna love the cover for that one because Sindri's gonna be front and center on it. I don't have a cover yet, just so but when I do. And that is, I'm working on it right now, and my goal is definitely a 2025 release. Because I would like to have all 3 of these books out in a somewhat timely manner, but I'm also working really hard to give myself the space that I need to make this book what I hope it should be. And especially, as you well know, once you get past book 1, all of a sudden you have all of these moving pieces, and it's a lot more complicated than it was starting off book 1 with like 3 boys at a execution, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, everybody's everywhere. So there will be some convergences, which I know people are very excited about. And I got to tell you, like, I've written 2 chapters of Sindri already in The Queen's Wolf, and opening her chapters up again and getting back in her head was just, she's going through some growth things, and it was just coming back to those characters, which I'm sure you've felt that same. You walk back into that world and it just feels like coming home, and you hang your hat up and you're like, all right, friends. So it's been really a really awesome feeling to dive back into the drafting process, because it's been a long time. since I was there with these characters. So that's coming out hopefully in 2025. And then one that I'm tentatively, I haven't set a date yet, tentatively hoping to put out yet in 2024 is called Cold Silver for Souls. And it is a necromancer bounty hunter in a fantasy world inspired by the Yukon Gold Rush. And so it's a fantasy Western, because fantasy Yukon Gold Rush doesn't exist yet as a subgenre. We'll get there. But I am so excited. It's a single POV, first person narration, and I am just having an absolute blast with this character. I have a cover in the works that should be done pretty soon, and it's kind of a expansion of, I wrote a short story for a indie anthology back in December, Advent of Winter. It was put on by Dominish Books, and he had 24 different indie authors write kind of an advent calendar of stories through December. And I sat down with a blank page and just started, you know what, I'm just going to throw a bunch of things in here that I want to write about and see what happens. And I came up with this kind of mashup of things, and I've been absolutely loving it. So I'm really excited for people to meet Hunter and her animated Rip.
Wow. Well, I mean, Bryn says, I totally echo this. Sounds like a cool book. Cool as heck book, I reckon.
Yeah.
Fancy Western. And another wonderful member of the community, Daniel Clauser, says, read the short story. It's good. Wow. Okay. Just getting more excited. I cannot wait to read it. That's exciting news, Tori. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Looking forward to that.
It's been a good balance with working on Queen's Wolf, because the mental exhaustion of creating, as you know, an epic fantasy series, it takes a lot out of you, as you well know. And Cold Silver has been kind of the tall glass of ice water during that process, that it's just single character, it's very deep POV, and I can do shootouts and, cool things. So, yeah.
Oh, man. I absolutely can't wait to read it. That is exciting news. So sounds like we can expect some great things coming from you on the book side. Any of you talk about quickly on the YouTube side that you're able to disclose that's coming up in the next little while, like stuff that excites you? Only stuff that obviously you can talk about that.
Well, I'm continuing my journey through the rest of Red Rising, so you guys can definitely plan on more of that. I am also going to be having a chat when I get back with Michael R. Miller, who's the author.
Oh, yes. Ascendant.
Ascendant. And we're going to talk about indie publishing and his journey, because he's done very, very well with his books and has a lot of. He's just super kind person and has a lot of wisdom to share. So I'm going to sit him down, and we're going to get into the details of what it takes to be a very full-time indie author. So I'm excited about that.
That's awesome. That sounds phenomenal. And yes, very successful indie author. Sounds like a great person. Okay, that's great stuff. I will make sure to be on that, to check that out. And we're being joined here near the end by another wonderful booktuber and author, John A. Douglas. Hail and good evening. Thanks so much, John. John's also supportive. Great guy. Go check out his channel and his book as well. So yeah, great to see you, John. Thanks for coming by. So Tori, I mean, we could chat, I think, for a long, long time. But again, I do want to respect your time. I know you're a busy person. So, but quickly before we go, I just want to give you the opportunity to let everyone know where they can find you in the space, both in terms of Booktube and your writing, where they can buy your books, all the wonderful places where we can locate you and your creative endeavors.
So on Booktube, I am Tori Talks 2 because Tori Talks 1 was taken. And you can find me on Twitter under the same name. And I think I'm Tori Talks 91 on Instagram. For my books, The Bloodstones is everywhere. It's on Amazon. You can get the audiobook pretty much anywhere if you like listening to audiobooks. Instead, I have a audiobook narrated by Andrew D. Meredith, who is a fellow indie author and just an incredibly talented narrator. And so, ebook, and it's on Kindle Unlimited. And then Phased is also on Kindle Unlimited now, and so is the paperback. I do have some copies on my website, ToriTecken.com. So if you want to order a signed copy, I do ship everywhere. So if my shipping thing doesn't say your country, just send me a message and I'll figure it out. But yeah, that's basically where you can find all of my stuff.
Awesome. I just want to put quickly just a couple quick comments at the end. Sounds like it's a really good series. A lot of people read the first book and not continued. I cannot stress how much the sequels are better than book one. Well, that's encouraging to hear. I think that's definitely sounds like a great TBR ad. And John A just notes, I'm not that you're not a book lover. Do that. That's why we're here, right, John? That that's why we're here. Oh, Anita, the wonderful Anita, another great booktuber and member of the community. And she notes, my late, you did already. And to know she's got home. No worries, Anita. I mean, you can, unfortunately, you came to the end, but you can catch the replay. Once it's done, it'll be posted. And Tori's links will also be in this video, but of course, she's noted them just a few moments ago. So, Tori, this has been so wonderful. I can't thank you enough for joining me on my channel. It's such an honor and a pleasure. And, there's a reason why you're beloved in both the writing sphere and the booktube sphere. And I think that was just highlighted by speaking to you today. So this final comment is Potteries of Pete. That's Avita. So
well, I want to thank you so much for having me on your channel, PL. I'm honestly I think as authors we have down times where we question what we're doing, and as I've been getting back into drafting and sorry, my cat's but as I've been getting back into drafting and trying to kind of get back on that bike, so to speak, this was such a lovely boost, and hearing you read passages from the book and talk so kindly about the story, that just lights a fire, and it makes me even more excited to go on vacation and write Queen's Wolf. So thank you for that, honestly.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. And please, folks, go and read this book. It is just amazing. Can't wait for the sequel. And my pleasure, Tori. You're a wonderful author and person. You know that. And I truly love this book. And you'll be hearing me talk about this more, I think, in future videos, I predict. So once again, everyone, thanks for everyone who stopped by in the chat. You're one of the reasons that this type of longer form content is something that a lot of people enjoy, and you make it what it is. So thank you so much, everybody that stopped by in the chat. And thanks to everyone who's going to watch watch the replay later on, who missed the live. And just a final quick comment. Last one from Daniel. Very excited for Queen's Wolf. Yep, we all are. Certainly fans of Tori and her work. So, everyone, thanks so much. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks so much for coming by. And thanks again to our wonderful guest, Tori TECKEN. And we will see you next time. Bye now.
Bye, everybody.